Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am back for another edition for Spinner of Yarns. Today we are going to be going over Chapter 6 of my book, Blood of the Wolf. You can find it on Amazon in paperback and on Kindle. You can also find it on barnesandnoble.com. Again, if you do like what I'm doing here, you like hearing the stories and the writing, you can help support what I'm doing by following the links down below in the description. That will lead you to my Redbubble, my eBay, Etsy stores. That's kind of my business. That's how I support my daughter and keep the writing going. So that would be much appreciated. You can also find it up in the banner for the page. But without further ado, let's get into this. Chapter 6, Days of Our Unlife. Michael tossed and turned most of the night as he thought about the events that had taken place in the pool hall. He didn't get much sleep, but he was finding that with these new abilities, he didn't need much to feel rest. Lisa was lying next to him trying to sleep, but he knew that with all his moving around, she wasn't having much luck. He looked over at the clock to see that it was 4 a.m. He knew she needed a rest, so he decided to get up and work out a bit to try and burn off the extra energy. Lisa rolled over as he was getting dressed. Getting up for a bit more than a bathroom trip, huh? Yeah, I got a lot on my mind, and with all this extra energy now, it isn't making it any easier to sleep. Figure I'm just going to go out for a run. Lisa looked a little concerned. What's got your mind spinning? Something Arthur said tonight that kind of coincided with a conversation you and I had earlier at the bus stop. I wasn't willing to kill Chan, even if it would have made him a witness. Arthur made some good points, though, about the evil I don't kill today being the evil that rapes or murders my loved ones tomorrow. Lisa nodded. Good point, yes, but killing someone should never be an easy thing. It should never be so black and white. You have to think of what he's been through these past years. In times of war, killing is sometimes duty, but just because it comes easy to him doesn't mean it needs to be so easy for you. When I said what I did at the bus stop, I simply meant that you can't take pity on the filth that runs the streets just because you have power and strength that dwarfs their own. After all, you know as well as I do that there is no such thing as a fair fight. Michael sighed. I know. I just can't help but think of how much killing may be necessary to make the world safe, or even the city for that matter. It just leaves me wondering, who do I save and who's not worth the time? I guess it'll all just depend on the severity of each individual situation. Lisa smiled. Just know that no matter what happens, I'll always love you, and I will always have your back. Michael sat down on the bed and gave her a hug and a kiss before leaving for his run. He ran for about 5 miles, faster than he had ever run before in his life. He wasn't going to be winning any races with cars, but he was damn sure he could outrun anyone on the track team with relative ease. He decided to run through the park on his way home because he felt the need to be close to nature, or as close as you can get in the city. He was about half a block away from the entrance when he heard a woman screaming for help. As he rounded the corner and entered the park, he could see a woman struggling with a group of men under a lamppost further down the path toward the center of the park. He ran down the path toward them, yelling for them to get away from her. One of the men pointed toward Michael as 2 others moved in his direction. As they got closer, Michael could sense that there was something off about them. There was nothing obvious at first glance, but they smelled of decay. Michael turned up a nose at the stench as these 2 men squared off with him. Boy, do you have bad timing or what? Michael covered his nose with a hand. When was the last time you bathed? The man to his right lifted an arm and smelled his pit. Ah, that's a sweet scent. You know, I might be insulted if I actually cared about the opinion of food. The man to Michael's right side bared 2 fangs and lunged at him. The sight startled him, which quickened his reflexes. As the vampire lunged in, Michael parried his attack and delivered a back fist to his ribs with an audible crack which sent him flying off the side of the trail and into the trees. The vampire that was struggling with the woman saw this and yelled to the others, "He's a fucking mutant!" After saying that, he turned back toward the woman and bit into her neck as blood gushed from the wound and drenched her shirt. He wasn't about to let Michael's interference interrupt his meal. The vampire next to him launched himself through the air at Michael. Die, mutant! Michael's eyes flared red as he reached out with his right hand, catching the vampire in midair by its throat. The one to his left took advantage of the distraction as it jumped onto Michael's back and bit into his neck. He winced in pain and growled a bone-chilling growl. The vampire that had bit him jumped back, clutching at its throat as the veins in its face and neck began to turn black. What are you? Your blood's like poison! The vampire that Michael had by the throat was desperately struggling, trying to get him to release his grip as he held it off the ground at arm's length with ease. The vampire had both feet on Michael's chest, but as it went to push back, he tore out his throat. The vampire turned to ash before he even hit the ground. Michael delivered a spinning tie kick to the head of the vampire kneeling behind him, which broke the vamp's neck and sent it collapsing to the ground. He stomped on its head and crushed it. As that vampire turned to ash, Michael spun around to face the one feasting on the woman he was trying to save, but he was gone. He had finished his meal and left. Just then the first vamp he had, sent crashing into the trees, came rushing towards him. This isn't over! Die! Michael thrust his hand in toward the vamp's face, plunging his fingers through its eye sockets. In a one fluid movement, he lifted him up off the ground and brought him crashing back down to the concrete path on the back of his head, caving in his face under the pressure. The vampire turned into ash right before his eyes. Michael walked over to the lifeless body of the woman he failed to save. Even with his heightened sense of hearing, he couldn't hear a heartbeat. As he stood there for a moment contemplating if there was any way he could have saved her, he saw something he didn't expect. Her soul rose up out of her body and stood next to him looking around. Are they gone? Michael looked at her a little puzzled because he knew ghosts existed, he just never thought he'd have a chat with one. She looked at him in confusion. What are you staring at? Sorry, I'm just a little puzzled as to how I'm talking to you right now. She smiled and acted very flirty. Well, thank you, I'm flattered, but why would I not talk to the man that just saved me? Michael raised an eyebrow. Saved you? How do I put this lightly? He pointed down to her lifeless body lying on the path. She looked down and scrambled backwards at the sight. No, I don't believe it. It can't be real. Michael reached out in desperation as if he could grab her, but the soul of the woman turned to run and took off through the park wailing. Michael ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. Damn it! Luca, the vampire that had escaped, stood back in the shadows watching with a sneer on his face as he licked some of the blood from his lips. He turned to leave as he gave a concerned yet menacing glance back in Michael's direction. He ran off into the darkness to seek shelter before the sun came up. Michael slowly walked the 5 blocks back to his house. It was 6:30 a.m. and the sun was coming up by the time he made it to the front steps. He shook his head as he tried to wrap his mind around the idea that vampires were real. The knowledge he gained from the transformation let him know that they existed, along with many other things. But seeing one firsthand was a whole different experience. Lisa was sitting on the bed in a towel, drying her hair when he walked in. How's your run? Eventful, to say the least. Don't go through the park at night anymore. She looked at him with a bit of confusion and sarcasm. Did the big, bad park prowler try to rape you? No, but the vampires did bite me. Lisa's jaw dropped. She nervously laughed a little. You're kidding, right? I wish I was. They were attacking a woman in the park, and when I tried to jump in to save her, 3 of them attacked me. By the time I was done killing them, the 4th one had already fed on her and gotten away. Lisa sat on the bed with a noticeably shaken look on her face. Michael sat down next to her. The oddest part about the whole thing was that when one of them bit me, it jumped back like it had been poisoned. Lisa snuggled in close to him for comfort. So what do I do now? Start carrying around crosses and holy water? You know I don't believe in that shit. Well, unfortunately, even if you did, it wouldn't work. You ever wonder when you're reading those books on Dracula that you look like so much, or that you like so much, why when Vlad drank the blood that spilled forth from the cross, it turned him? He was drinking the blood of his master. He was cursed by the cross to be a weapon for his creator and spread a plague across the land, driving more people to the church in search of a savior. The whole drink of my blood, eat of my flesh ritual they do in church all the time, not as much metaphor as they'd like you to believe. Their faith is overflowing with sorcery and ritualistic magic. This is why they condemn others that use magic so much. It doesn't look so powerful if everyone can do it. Lisa stared at Michael with a dumbfounded look. Almost simultaneously, Michael heard Angela and Alan behind him. Well, then how do we kill them? He turned to see them standing in the doorway. Angela shifted uncomfortably, partly because of the knowledge that vampires exist, but also because of Michael's explanation about their creation. She was raised to be a devout Catholic, and some of the things he had been talking about lately greatly unnerved her. Sorry, we couldn't help but overhear the conversation. Michael grabbed the katana lying next to his bed. You take their heads. Lisa thought for a second and then spoke up. What about a stake through the heart? Doesn't work because they don't have hearts to destroy. They're undead. They're like smart zombies. Michael heard the thought before Alan even spoke. And if garlic worked, we could just send a gang of Italian pasta chefs after them. As Michael made the comment, Alan envisioned a mob of chefs with garlic necklaces chasing vampires down the street. He chuckled quietly to himself. Besides, they've been here for many millennia. They're not a plague that will be knocked out easily. Just stay on your toes if you're out at night. Michael grabbed some clothes to change into. I'm going to go hit the shower. I have to get ready for school. Luca walked through the sewers towards his home. He kicked a sewer rat that crossed his path, which exploded as it hit the wall. So much anger and confusion swelled inside of him. He popped up through a sewer grate in the floor of the abandoned factory he and the rest of his brood resided in. Tina walked up and threw her arms around him to welcome him home. Luca grabbed her by the hair and tossed her to the ground. Do I look like I want your affections, whore? Sometimes I wonder why I ever turned you. I should have left you turning tricks in that downtown Jack shack where I found you. Dieter looked up from the book he was reading. Something wrong? Where are the others? They're dead. That was quick. You only turned them last week. What happened? Luca walked over and sat down on a couch in the middle of the room. We were attacked by some mutant in the park. His blood was like poison, and there was something supernatural about him. He killed them with his bare hands. Dieter raised an eyebrow in intrigue. Do you think the hunters have some new weapon? Luca shook his head. Not likely. He seemed surprised to see us. There's something more to this one. I want to know who and what he is, and how to kill him. Dieter put his book down and started walking out of the room towards the office. I'll see what I can dig up. Luca waved his hand dismissively toward Tina. Take the trash with you. I don't feel like looking at her right now. I'd be too tempted to throw her outside and let her cook. Tina hissed in Luca's direction. Dieter started making a call on his cell phone as he motioned for Tina to follow. He held the phone up to his ear as someone picked up on the other end. This is Dieter. Seems we have a new player in the game. It appears that this new irritation has blood that is poison to our kind. Count Vlad, Dracula's head librarian, sat at a desk listening to Dieter's story. He laughed as Dieter explained what was happening in Portland. Impossible! Have you been snacking on those drugged-up club girls again, Dieter? I think you're hallucinating. Don't mock me, librarian. Luca saw this with his own eyes. This thing's blood was not only poisonous, but it was able to kill 3 vampires with its bare hands. Just find out what you can and get back to me. The librarian sighed in frustration and looked a little irritated at the request. Only because Luca is like a son to Vlad. Am I even going to humor this? I'll call you if I find something. The librarian hung up the phone and began searching the computer database for anything that fit the description of what Dieter had described. He searched for hours with no luck. Nothing in their history spoke of such a thing that could destroy them so easily and poison them with its blood. After no luck searching for this new threat, the librarian decided that he must inform Vlad. Vlad was lounging on a burgundy Victorian couch, biting the wrist of a half-dressed servant girl, while another girl without clothing sat next to him with her head on his shoulder, rubbing his chest. He paid the librarian no mind as he entered the room. The naked girl just looked over and smiled. The librarian politely smiled back. I see your pets are treating you well, my lord. Vlad looked up from his meal with a hint of irritation for the interruption. My apologies, sire, for the interruption. Lucas sent word from the U.S. of a new threat. Vlad sat upright and smiled in amusement as he wiped his mouth with a napkin. And what is it that Luca feels could be such a threat in that god-forsaken part of the world? He always did have a taste for peasants. Am I to believe that one of those mongrels actually poses some threat to our kind? We look gods to these feeble humans. The librarian nods as he ponders how to explain it and not sound crazy himself. According to Luca, this is no human. He says his blood is poisonous to us, and he's powerful enough to kill our kind with just his bare hands. Vlad laughed. Not likely. He's been among the swine for too long. He's beginning to lose his mind. Nevertheless, see what you can find to ease the boy's mind. But that's just it, my lord. There is nothing in our history books that even speak of such a thing. The only thing that even comes close to it is a lycanthrope. But even they don't have blood that poisons us. Vlad sucked his teeth in irritation. Then he growled as he rose from the couch, pushing the two women away. I remember an old acquaintance once telling me of such a beast, but he spoke of it like a fairy tale that warriors tell around a campfire. Maybe his fairy tale holds truth. Vlad growled again with a look of reluctance on his face. Azrael! Azrael, show yourself! As he demanded Azrael's appearance, a winged shadow crawled across the chamber and sparks showered down from the chandelier. As the lights flickered from the shadow rose a man in a suit with black feathered wings and jet black eyes. How dare you make demands of me? Azrael raised his right hand and launched Vlad into the rafters at the corner of the room, pinning him there. The librarian ran as the two women cowered. Know your place, parasite! Azrael raised his left hand in the direction of the librarian and froze him in place. You speak to me as though I were some dog here to do your bidding. Azrael closed his left hand, and as he did, a blackish-purple wave of energy shot out in all directions through the room. The librarian instantly turned to ash, and the two women became corpses. Vlad clutched at his throat, trying to free himself from the invisible force that held him there on the ceiling. Azrael looked up at him and growled as he dropped his hand and let Vlad fall. Vlad hit the ground on his hands and knees. He stood up, rubbing his throat, as he glared at Azrael. Azrael stared at Vlad in contempt. With his arms folded, Vlad bowed his head. I meant no disrespect. Azrael smirked. Oh, I beg to differ. You meant much disrespect. Maybe a few centuries in the pit will do you some good. Give me one reason why I shouldn't cast you into the hellfires right now. Vlad put up a hand, pleading for a moment of lenience. I received word from a much respected source in the U.S. that there's a new threat. It is one whose blood is poisonous to our kind and can kill us with its bare hands. I recalled a story you told me centuries ago, so I figured you would know what might have that kind of power. Azrael looked intrigued. I might. I'd have to see this thing for myself. Care to take a trip? Vlad nodded. Just give me a moment to get my things. Azrael glared at him. Again with the demands. Vlad looked very uneasy. I'm sorry. Please excuse me. Azrael smiled. That's better. Vlad left the room momentarily, and when he returned, he was fully dressed, wearing a regal-looking trench coat, sunglasses, and a saber with an intricately jeweled grip at its side. Azrael shook his head, like he was looking at a fool. Are you ready? Yes. Azrael placed a hand on Vlad's shoulder as they sunk into the shadow of the Angel of Death. A winged shadow rushed across the floor of Luca's home, as Vlad and Azrael rose out of it. Luca and Dieter knelt before them to show respect. Tina walked into the room smiling as she saw the newcomers. She held out a hand to Azrael for him to shake. Why didn't anyone tell me we had guests? Pleased to make your acquaintance. Luca and Dieter looked at her in embarrassment for her lack of respect. Vlad growled at her. Kneel before your masters, filth! Tina jumped back in fear, but Azrael placed a hand up and stopped Vlad. That is no way to treat a lady. He held out a hand and Tina grasped it. You three could learn a thing or two from this gentle... Before Tina could finish what she was saying, her arm began to rot before her eyes. She tried to pull away, and as she did, it came off and fell to the ground. She screamed in pain as Azrael just smiled a sinister grin. However, my dear, you are no lady. Tina ran from the room screaming as she clutched the rotted stump where her arm used to be. Luca looked up at Azrael with a grin. I don't know who you are, sir, but I like you already. Luca and Dieter rose to their feet. Luca glanced back in the direction Tina ran with an expression of amusement. I'd shake your hand, but I'd like to keep the limbs I have intact. Azrael simply smirked. A sign of intelligence. I wouldn't have expected that from an acquaintance of yours, Vlad. Luca looked in Vlad's direction with much confusion as to who could speak to him so disrespectfully and still live. I beg your pardon, but who are you? Azrael dismissively pointed toward Vlad. I shall let him explain. Azrael turned his back as he began looking around Luca's home, hands folded in front of him, completely uninterested in introductions. Vlad reluctantly did Azrael's bidding. This is Azrael, master of our kind. Luca looked confused. I thought that was you. So does everyone else. Azrael came to me after I was turned. He informed me that these new powers came with a price. I was now a servant of our Lord. He is one of our God's generals. He is the angel of death. Luca and Dieter stood visibly shaken as these words were spoken. To find out that one as powerful as their master was the servant of another. Azrael sighed with content that enough had been said, as he was growing impatient. Enough small talk. Where is this destroyer of your kind? I would like to meet him face to face so I may kill him and be done with this. Luca pointed in the direction of the park. He was in the park not far from here, last time I saw him, but that was hours ago. The sun was coming up, and so I had to leave. Azrael nodded. Ah, yes. I always forget how fragile we made your kind, so that you might not forget your place again. No matter. Vlad and I will go take a look at this park and see what we can find. Luca raised a hand. Forgive me, but what about the wings? Won't they draw attention? Azrael smiled in amusement. Young minds. Such curiosity. With a wave of his hand, the air around him shimmered, and the wings disappeared. His eyes also appeared to be normal. Luca smiled as Azrael waved for Vlad to follow like a mere servant. Come, Vlad. Let us go find this nuisance. Vlad scowled at the idea of being beckoned in such a way, but he didn't dare speak out of turn lest Azrael make an example of him in front of Luca and Dieter. They arrived at the park just in time to see the police gathering their equipment and the coroner pulling away with the body of the woman. Excuse me. They waited around for a short time before approaching the scene. As they walked up, Vlad sniffed the air and sneered in disgust. I can smell the wolf. He was here. But he's no normal lichen. Azrael looked around the area with displeasure. This is no ordinary wolf. He's the Thunder Wolf. Vlad dismissed the extra title with a laugh. A wolf is a wolf, so how do we kill it? Take his head off like you would any other. However, don't underestimate this one, Vlad. His kind is the bane to not only your kind, but all of us. Vlad looked confused. Why didn't you warn me that a threat like this existed? There was no need, because all the others have been killed or imprisoned. He's the last of his kind, on this wretched planet. The sooner we find him, the sooner we can be done with this. So be of some use and start tracking. Vlad scowled as he spun around and walked towards the edge of the park and followed the scent. He tracked Michael's smell to the front steps of his house. This must be where he lives. Azrael raised an eyebrow. How long did it take you to come to that conclusion? Azrael held his hand up to the door and closed his eyes. There's no one home. Good, then they won't expect to find us inside when they get back. Vlad smiled and was about to break the lock and go inside before Azrael stopped him. In all these centuries of existence, I would think you might have learned something by now. Never underestimate your opponent, especially one with power equal to or greater than your own. We'll come back tonight, when he's more likely to be home. Besides, I'm sure Luca would like a chance to see this one destroyed. Vlad grumbled with frustration. Fine, but I want this one for my own trophy wall. Azrael smiled a mischievous grin, knowing what Michael was and that killing him would be a task that Vlad could never hope to accomplish on his own. But of course, Vlad, I wouldn't have it any other way. As Azrael and Vlad walked away, Arthur watched from his window across the street. Not like the Asian mob to send a couple of white boys to do their dirty work. I wonder who those two are. That afternoon, Michael sat in his bedroom at the computer doing homework. He could hear some of the neighborhood girls outside playing in the sprinklers. Just as he started to revel in the peace of the moment, he heard Lisa outside yelling at someone. "Hey, get away from them!" One of the neighborhood cholos, Jose, was harassing some of the younger girls in a very sexual manner, and it wasn't settling well with Lisa. "Mamacita, you girls are looking mighty fine, getting nice and wet in the sprinklers on such a hot day." Michael snapped the pencil he was holding in his hand after hearing Jose's voice outside. There had always been an ongoing rivalry between the two of them. He could hear Lisa outside confronting Jose and the other members of his gang. "They're just little girls, you sick fucks." "Well, then maybe we'll just have to start with you and save them for later." Michael ran out the front door to see Jose moving towards Lisa with two others, while two more guarded the girls near the sprinklers, so they couldn't get away. He yelled out to get his attention. "Hey, Jose! Don't you have a taco stand you should be working at right now?" "Nah, I made your mom take over because I wasn't moving any money off her ugly ass on the corner. Besides, my homies wanted to party, so I told them I knew where we could find some fine little honeys." Michael started moving towards him. "All right, and since your mom wouldn't let you rape your little sister and her cousins anymore, you decided to come this way into my neighborhood." Jose turned to Michael, trying to act tough as he started looking very aggressive. "See, that's where you're wrong. This is all my hood, and I can do whatever I want with whomever I want." Just then Arthur started walking across the street, wearing camo pants, military boots, and no shirt. He was carrying an asp, baton, and he had a cigarette in his mouth. The other two cholos that were guarding the girls started moving towards Arthur when they saw him. Jose turned to look over his shoulder at what they were moving towards. "So this is how it's going to be. And here I thought we were just starting to come to an understanding." Arthur laughed. "The one thing you need to understand is that you don't run this hood anymore." Alan walked out of the house and stood next to Michael to watch his back. Jose just shook his head and smiled. "You're still outnumbered, Ese." Michael smiled as he walked up to Jose and got almost nose to nose with him. "It's time for you to start running." He flared his eyes bright red, and as he did, Jose pissed himself and started crying uncontrollably as he started backpedaling and almost tripped over his own feet. "Ah! What the fuck are you? You're like a fucking Diablo and shit!" Jose ran down the street screaming as Michael laughed and let his eyes turn back to normal. The rest of the gang members, seeing their leader run in fear, became quickly disheartened and ran away too. Alan looked confused for a second until it dawned on him that Michael did, and then he started laughing as well. Arthur walked up looking confused. "The hell'd you do?" Alan laughed some more. "You went all demon eyes on him, didn't you?" Michael chuckled. "Yep." Now Arthur looked even more confused. "Wait a minute, demon eyes? What the hell are you guys talking about?" Lisa patted Arthur's shoulder as she walked past. "His eyes tend to glow red when he gets pissed. It's kind of hot." "Okay, yeah, you really need to fill me in on what's going on with you." Michael nodded his head. "I'll tell you what I know so far, but not out here." They all walked into Michael's house where he could explain the events of the past week in a bit more detail. Jose didn't stop running until he got back to his house a few blocks away. He was standing in front of an open refrigerator guzzling a beer when the rest of the gang that was with him walked in. Hector walked up to him very confused. "The hell happened back there, man? Have you gone loco or something?" He pointed at a wet spot on Jose's pants. "Dude, did you piss yourself?" Hector started laughing hysterically. Jose took the beer he was drinking and threw it at his head, but Hector dodged just in time as the bottle broke on the wall behind him. Jose opened another bottle of beer before closing the fridge. He drank that beer down just as fast, and then leaned back on the counter, looking over at the rest of the gang. "He's like a demon or something. His eyes were glowing red." Hector looked at him confused, as did the rest of the gang. "Whose eyes?" "Michael's eyes. They were glowing in red." "Damn, man, what have you been smoking?" Jose got right up in Hector's face. "Are you questioning me, Primo?" Hector threw up his hands. "No, man, but you have to admit it does sound kind of loco." Jose walked out of the kitchen and down the hall towards his room. "Maybe, but I know one thing, yo. That fucker's gonna die." When he came out of his room, he had a new pair of pants on. He was holding a 9mm, and he tossed a Tech 9 to Hector. "Call up the homies. We're going to fill that fucker full of holes and send him back to the hell where he came from." The rest of the gang nodded and cheered in agreement. Arthur was standing out on the front porch smoking a cigarette, trying to filter through everything that Michael had just told him. Michael walked out with 2 Pepsis in hand as he handed one to Arthur. I could use something a bit stronger, but thanks. Michael stared forward, wondering what Arthur's reaction was going to be. You cool? Yeah, I'm cool. Just a bit much to take in all at once. It's a bit of a mindfuck, you know? Tell me about it. It's my life. Well, aren't we 2 fucking peas in a pod? A government super soldier and an experiment alien hybrid. He sighed. Your secret's safe with me. Arthur stuck out his hand to shake Michael's, but as he reached out to return the gesture, they suddenly stood ready at the sound of screeching tires coming around the corner. They both saw Jose and a few other members of his gang leaning out the window with guns drawn. Michael was the first to react as he put his hand to Arthur's chest and kinetically sent him flying back through the door to the house as he dove through the door behind him. 3 bullets struck Michael's back as he was coming through the door, and he landed with a thud in the living room. As rounds shredded the walls of his home, he stood up, slamming the door, taking a few more rounds to the side, and growling with each impact. He saw Alan huddled over his mom, and Lisa in a corner, but the gunfire continued to move along the wall, inching closer to them. Michael ran towards them, taking another shot to the leg as he jumped in front of them. He could actually see a volley of bullets heading their way, as he held out his hands in protest. As he did this, he felt the slight tingle in his head again, and that glowing shield erected itself around them like it did before. He watched the bullets bounce off the shield harmlessly as they continued down the wall. He heard the guns continue to fire and the sound of tires screeching again, before it all stopped and they sped off. Michael groaned in pain as the shield dropped, and he collapsed. Alan turned to see him lying behind him, full of bullet holes. Holy shit, Michael! Alan and Lisa screamed when they turned to see his condition. Michael grabbed his head. I already got shot. I could do without the migraine. Alan held the back of Michael's head as he looked at him with genuine worry. Michael looked up at him, a little amused by his reaction. Arthur was picking himself up off the floor and running over to him. Michael couldn't help himself as he looked at Alan. If you start crying, I'm gonna piss myself. Fuck you, you dick! Alan pushed him away as Michael winced again. Hey, I'm still shot, you know. He rolled over and pushed himself up to his feet. He lifted his shirt to examine the bullet holes in his side, but he could see that his body was already pushing the bullets out, and the wounds were closing. Arthur looked on in shock. Angela lifted the back of his shirt to see the same thing. Her eyes were wide with astonishment as she watched the wounds close up on their own. Even as I watch, I still can't believe it. Michael smiled as he took off his shirt the rest of the way. Well, this is pretty much useless now. Just then they heard a scream from next door. They all looked at each other, dreading what the scream meant. Michael's keen hearing picked up on what theirs couldn't, though. Oh my God, not my little girl! Lisa, it's your sister. They all ran next door to see what happened. As they ran into Lisa's sister's room, they found her father holding her mother, as her mother cradled her lifeless body. A blood splattering covered the wall next to her head. She had been shot in the eye socket while doing her homework. Arthur ran for the phone. I'll call 911! Michael held Lisa close to him as she buried her face in his chest and cried. She couldn't bear to see her sister like that. Her father looked up at the two of them. Michael, please take Lisa out of here. She doesn't need to see this. Michael nodded as he turned to Lisa and walked out of the room. Alan followed along with Angela, who was sobbing. Michael sat with Lisa on the couch, holding her while she cried. Alan held Angela while Arthur talked to the police on the phone. Arthur hung up the phone as he walked over and put a hand on Lisa's shoulder. The police are on the way. Lisa looked up at Michael, crying and enraged. They don't deserve the treatment the police will give them. They deserve much worse. He looked over at Arthur. Now, personally, I didn't really see who did it, did you? Arthur smiled. I like where you're going, Mike. It's about time. He gave Arthur a very stern look. Try not to look so excited. Michael could hear the sirens coming down the street. Alan looked over at him, and his eyes got wide. Dude, you still have a bullet hole in your pants. Michael looked down at his leg to see the bloody hole in his jeans. Damn it, I'll be right back. He ran out the back door and jumped the fence that separated their yards. He grabbed his bullet-riddled shirt as he ran into his bedroom to change. He stuffed the pants and shirt into a suitcase in the back of his closet, and then quickly put on a new set of clothes. He heard the police pulling up outside, so he walked out the front door, looking at the house like he was assessing the damage. They talked to the police for a few hours as they walked around the inside and outside of Michael and Lisa's house. Michael held on to Lisa as the coroner drove away with her little sister. The sun was going down by the time the last car started driving off. Arthur started walking across the street to his house to give Michael and Lisa a little time to themselves. "I'll go get ready." Michael nodded as he held Lisa. She sobbed into his chest. "Make those sons of bitches pay, Michael. I plan on it." He gave Lisa one last kiss and then walked next door to get ready as well. Justice and Wartorn met up down the street. They made a plan that Wartorn would sit on the roof across the way from Jose's with a sniper rifle and take out anyone that tried to escape, while Justice took point and went into the house. As they walked up towards the house, Wartorn split off to the house across the street while Justice walked up the driveway. Hector walked out of the house carrying a 9mm while 4 other members of the gang followed him. Hector laughed when he saw Michael. "You're a little early for Halloween." Justice heard Wartorn in his earpiece. "You got company off to your left." Hector pointed towards Vlad and Azrael as they walked up the sidewalk towards the house. Justice turned to see what he was pointing at. "Looks like you're all ready for a party, yo." Hector motioned to the rest of the gang. "Get those fools. I'll handle this one." Luca, Dieter, and Tina walked up from the other side. Tina's arm was just beginning to grow back, but it still looked like mangled and rotten. Vlad growled towards the oncoming gang members. Justice could smell that these newcomers were vamps, but he could sense that Azrael was something quite different. He looked towards Azrael as the 4 gang members surrounded him, and Vlad. "Well, you may not be a vamp, but you still stink of death." Azrael smiled. "Very good, Thunderwolf. And now death is what you shall receive." He shut his eyes momentarily as the facade dropped and his black wings reappeared, along with his black eyes as he reopened them. The gang members froze in their tracks, except for Hector, who instantly opened fire on Azrael. Justice instinctively held up a hand in Hector's direction, just in case the shots might be meant for him, and as he did, the shield emerged around him. He smiled in the realization that all he really had to do was will it to appear, and it would. Azrael stood laughing as the rounds bounced off of him harmlessly. Vlad grabbed the gang member closest to him and started feeding it, and at the same time effortlessly ripping out the throat of another. Justice slowly drew his sword as he was watching this all unfold. Just when he heard Wartorn come over the earpiece, "Look out behind you!" Justice heard the quick movement of Luca's feet as he ran at him and leapt into the air. He met his attack with a back kick to his ribs that sent him flying through the windshield of a parked car. Dieter winced at the sight of that, while Tina laughed. Wartorn looked on in amazement. "The hell did you get yourself into?" "Never mind the bangers. The others are vamps. They're the bigger issue. Aside from the one with the black wings, I don't know what the hell he is." "Nothing that a bullet can't take care of." "Yeah, about that. Unless the bullet is going to sever their entire head from their body, it would really only piss them off." Hoping that Hector was a horrible aim and that a few rounds from his rifle could drop Azrael, Wartorn took aim at his head through his scope and opened fire. Azrael staggered to the side as the rounds impacted and turned around, roaring as he tried to see where the shots came from. "I've had enough of you parasites!" He clenched his fist and closed his eyes as a wave of purple energy shot out in all directions. Vlad released the gangbanger he was feeding on and jumped into the air in a panic just before the wave hit him. Dieter and Luca followed suit and jumped into the air as well. When Tina tried to follow, Luca smiled maniacally as he kicked her in the face and sent her collapsing back down to the ground to be engulfed within the energy. As she fell into the purple wave, she instantly turned to ash. The wave washed right over Michael and had little effect aside from making him shudder as his expression turned to one of disgust at the sensation. He watched as Jose's gang turned to corpses as it hit them. Azrael opened his eyes to see Michael standing unharmed, which left him with a look of confusion as he raised an eyebrow. "I guess I'll just have to kill you the old-fashioned way." Azrael began to walk toward Michael, but as he did, Vlad quickly ran to his side and bowed respectfully. "My lord, you promised me this trophy." Azrael gave Vlad a sideways glance of reluctance, but conceded as he motioned in Justice's direction. "So I did." Vlad drew his saber from his side, smiling sinisterly. He charged Justice, swinging the sword at him with an overhand strike. Justice quickly parried the attack and brought his own sword down across the back of Vlad's leg as he moved past. However, Vlad moved quickly and out of the way before the blade cut in. Justice kept his stance sideways, so to never turn his back on Azrael. Vlad charged Justice again, bringing the sword in lower to run him through the chest. But again, Justice parried the attack, this time countering with a strike across Vlad's ribcage. But again, Vlad jumped back and dodged the attack. Azrael stood with his arms folded as he shook his head, smiling. "Age is taking its toll on you, Vlad." War-Torn came over the earpiece. "Why are you playing with him? Just kill him." "I'm not playing with him. I'm simply fighting tactically with a veteran warrior." Hearing the conversation between War-Torn and Justice through the Justice's earpiece, Vlad nodded toward him, and then bowed in feigned respect. "I appreciate your code of honor, friend." Vlad looked up with a hungry smile. "Now die!" Vlad charged Justice again, attempting to run him through. Justice changed his grip on the sword to a reverse grip, and as Vlad came in, he brought the sword across his body, blocking Vlad's attack. Justice stepped sideways to Vlad's outside and brought his katana down and through Vlad's hip. He pulled the sword out and sliced up through Vlad's sword arm, cutting it off at the elbow. The arm turned to ash before it hit the ground. Vlad dropped to one knee as Justice turned to face him. "I never said I was being honorable. I just don't underestimate my opponent." Justice moved to the side of Vlad, that was now missing an arm. He could see that the arm was already beginning to regrow, as he kicked Vlad's sword out of reach. Vlad clutched his bloody stump and looked up at Justice, snarling with bloodshot eyes filled with fury. Vlad started to lunge forward, but Justice kicked him in the face, breaking his jaw and knocking him to his back. He looked over towards Azrael, who continued to smile and chuckle at Vlad's apparent doom. "I take it this amuses you." "But of course. He is of little use to me." "So then I take it you wouldn't be bothered by the removing of his head." "It's yours for the taking." Vlad looked up at Azrael with an expression of shock and betrayal. Justice raised his sword and began to strike down when he heard Luca yell out from behind, "No!" Luca leapt through the air towards Justice, but he spun to meet his attack as he moved to take Luca's head. As soon as Justice's back was turned, Azrael moved with eye-blurring speed and grabbed him by the back of the neck. He wrenched Justice backward as Luca safely landed inches away. Theodore walked up smiling an arrogant smile, which quickly turned to pain as a bullet pierced him in the side of the head and exploded out of the other side, which sent him collapsing to the ground as blood flowed freely from the wound. Luca turned in shock to see Dieter laying there and snarled toward the rooftop across the street, where he could now see War-Torn's heat signature. Luca charged toward the house, as War-Torn fired again, but Luca dodged to the side as the round missed his head by an inch. Justice plunged the sword backward, going to drive it through Azrael's stomach, but the sword slid off harmlessly, aside from slicing open his shirt. Azrael grabbed the sword by the blade and yanked it out of Justice's hand. He tossed the sword to the side as he dug his fingers into the back of Justice's neck, which made him scream out in pain. "You should have known mortal weapons cannot hurt me." The pain sent Justice into a rage as his eyes flared red. He kicked Azrael in the knee, breaking his leg. Azrael's eyes went wide with pain. As Justice spun, wrapping his arm around the arm that Azrael was gripping the back of his neck with, this caused Azrael to bend backwards as he tore a chunk of flesh out of Justice's neck that exposed part of his spinal column. This pain only enraged Justice further as he drew his arm back and punched Azrael in the chest, which sent him collapsing to the ground. Azrael coughed up a thick black blood. Justice backed away, clutching at the back of his neck, which was already beginning to regenerate. Azrael roared with fury as his leg reset itself. He sprang up to his feet and lunged at Justice, but as he came in, Justice delivered a thrust kick to his chest, which slid him back a few feet. Justice flew towards him with a knee strike meant for his head. Azrael blocked the strike with his hand, and as Justice came back down, he uppercut him in the chin, which sent him flying backward and bounced him off a police car that came skidding around the corner. Several more police cars came around the corner and blocked off the street. Police cars came from the other end of the street as well, and did the same. A voice came over a loudspeaker. "Get down on the ground, now!" Azrael laughed as he extended his black feathered wings and rose into the air looking down at the scene. "I answer to no mortal." As Justice picked himself up, 2 police officers lunged at him, trying to restrain him. As hard as they struggled to get Justice back down, or to get his arms behind his back, he just wouldn't budge. He looked at the officers with that red flare in his eyes. "Back off!" The cops ran in terror and hid behind their cars. The rest of the officers had their attention on Azrael, who looked even more ominous in the air with the moonlight behind him. Vlad picked up his sword with his freshly regenerated arm as he walked towards the center of the street. Dieter slowly picked himself up as the hole in his head began to close. Luca was focused on getting to War-Torn as he leapt into the air towards the rooftop he was perched on. Seeing this, War-Torn jumped towards Luca as he opened fire at the near point-blank range. Shredding his chest and abdomen, Luca coughed up blood, falling to the ground as War-Torn landed not too far away. 3 police officers ran towards him with guns drawn. "Drop the gun! Get on the ground!" War-Torn grumbled from behind his mask. Yeah, I know the routine." War-Torn dropped the assault rifle and put his hands behind his head. Just as the cops went to arrest him, Luca sprang to his feet and ran towards them. One of the cops turned to restrain Luca, but he just grabbed the cop by the throat and bit into his neck. The other 2 officers, seeing this, released War-Torn and pointed their guns at Luca. After drinking the one officer dry, Luca threw him to the side and lunged for War-Torn. The 2 officers standing on either side of him opened fire, but Luca was so enraged that it had no effect. Luca roared with anger as he snarled at the 2 cops, completely unaware that War-Torn had drawn his boot knife. "Ah, shut up!" He plunged the blade into Luca's forehead, which stopped him in his tracks. While this was happening, Justice was getting ready to square off with Vlad and Azrael once again. The officers were opening fire on Azrael, unaware that their bullets would have no effect. Azrael laughed a roaring laughter as the rounds bounced off of him. "It is time that you insects learn the true meaning of power." Azrael held his hands outstretched to the side as a purplish energy began building up towards the center, slowly growing larger and larger. Justice looked up to see this, but noticed that Vlad was now turning to run as he yelled back towards Dieter, "Time to leave! We don't want to be here when he unleashes that!" Dieter smiled towards Justice and then turned to follow. Justice looked back towards Azrael as the glow from the energy was beginning to light up the whole street. Many of the officers were shielding their eyes because of how bright it was becoming. Justice shook his head. "Fuck that!" He flew at top speed toward Azrael, with his fist drawn back ready to strike. War-Torn stood watching, with his jaw dropped in disbelief at what he was witnessing. Just as Justice was about to impact, there was a bright white flash that sent him crashing back down to the ground. When the light dimmed, he was lying in a crater, stunned and grimacing in pain. War-Torn and the police looked around to see that everyone that had been standing before the flash was still alive, but Azrael, Vlad, Luca, and Dieter were gone. The police crowded around the crater as War-Torn ran to Justice's side to see if he was okay. He had his rifle slung over his shoulder. In the confusion, no one saw him pick it back up. "Are you all right?" "Broken ribs and a killer headache, but other than that, I'm good." The commanding officer on the scene walked up. "You 2 have a lot of explaining to do." War-Torn looked down at Justice. "Any idea on how we're getting out of this?" "Help me up and then hang on tight." War-Torn helped Justice to his feet, and as he did, he could hear Justice's ribs resetting themselves with an awful crunch. Justice winced in pain and then looked around at the police. "Maybe later, fellas." He flew into the air and away from the scene, carrying War-Torn at top speed. As the cops watched them fly away, he flew back to his house and sat down in the backyard as soon as he was sure no one was looking. As they walked into the house, they took off their masks and stood in the kitchen, trying to let the events of the night settle in their minds. Arthur shook his head, trying to process everything that he saw. "The hell just happened back there?" "Your guess is as good as mine." "I was sure that energy was building up was going to wipe out everyone." You and me both, which is why I'm at a loss as to explain where they all went. So what now? Michael just shook his head because he really didn't have an answer to it. I'd say lay low for a few days and see if they make a move or we're able to catch a lead on their whereabouts. Aside from that, I need to be there for Lisa and her family right now. Arthur nodded in agreement. Well, then I think it's time for me to head home because I really need a stiff drink after this. Call me if you hear anything. Will do. Arthur walked out the back door, making sure to put his mask back on so he wouldn't be recognized in uniform. Michael took a look out the front window to make sure he didn't see anyone watching the house before heading off to bed. Lisa was waiting for him when he got to his room. He walked over and sat down on the bed beside her, putting an arm around her as she snuggled in close. He could tell what was on her mind, even before he said it. Did you get them? In a manner of speaking, between the fight with the vamps and some Blackwing thing, most of Jose's gang is dead. Unfortunately, we didn't see Jose in all the confusion. Can only assume he got away. Lisa nodded and began to cry as Michael held her close, knowing there wasn't a lot he could do to console her. He just tried to be a source of strength through such a trying time. He worried what the near future would hold now, that there was something out there that knew what he was. How many more things that go bump in the night would be coming for him when they find out? And could he keep the people he loved most in the world safe? Vlad, Luca, and Dieter found themselves back at Luca's place. They were all looking at each other with a troubled look of confusion. Luca was the first to break the silence. How the hell did we get back here? Vlad looked around the room. Wait a minute, where's Azrael? Azrael found himself surrounded in darkness, two archangels standing to either side of him. Azrael shouted out in rage, Why am I back here? Gabriel looked at Azrael scornfully. You forget your place, Azrael. None of us shall make ourselves known to the humans in such a way without his approval. Azrael scoffed. His approval? We hear from him maybe once or twice in a century when he needs us to run an errand. Aside from that, we are expected to wait until he grows tired of these insects? Gabriel breathed deeply, trying to contain her growing impatience with Azrael. We are forbidden to move until the time of the rapture. He has these humans convinced they will find salvation in his kingdom. He builds an army to fight alongside of us in the great war that is to come. Even if a few refuse, what do we care? They're either cannon fodder or food. Their choice. He doesn't need you exposing yourself and scaring them away. There are enough naysayers doing a good enough job of that on their own. Our ranks are already split down the middle, so we don't need such thoughtless displays weakening our growing forces. Azrael hung his head and sighed. Did I forget to mention that there's a thunderwolf living amongst them? Gabriel turned abruptly to face Azrael. What? And why haven't you killed him? Azrael looked as if he was pondering that very same question. My powers have no effect on him. They just wash over him harmlessly. Gabriel nodded. Strange, but not unforeseen. Simply just means he's one of the true immortals, and we will simply have to imprison him. But we'll do it through the proper channels. Can you be trusted not to get directly involved? Azrael sneered a bit at the question of his loyalty. I live to serve. With a flash, the two archangels were gone, and Azrael was left standing alone. Stay on your toes, brothers, and let us not forget the past. Azrael could still remember a time of chaos before they were called angels. They were once proud members of the ranks of the Valkyries, before Odin had pulled his forces back to Asgard in order to heal after the Great War had ravaged the earth. They had been left behind in the struggle when Bifrost, the dimensional bridge between Asgard and Earth, collapsed before they could return. The confusion caused panic in their ranks and much fighting, until their ranks split down the middle, half remaining loyal to Asgard, while the other half joined Christ's ranks as his angels. We were once his cannon fodder, so I won't be surprised when we become it again. Michael held Lisa close while the priest read the last rites over her sister's grave. The rain was coming down hard, only adding to the somber feel of the scene. Family and friends huddled under umbrellas, paying their last respects. As Michael looked over towards Lisa's mother and father, he could see the spirit of her sister standing next to them. Her spirit glided over to Michael, and as she hovered in front of him, her face distorted as her eyes sunk in, and her lips curled in an expression of pain. He knows what you are, and he won't stop until you're dead. All the souls of Earth are his slaves. With that, her head rocked back and her mouth opened wide, as she let out a scream that everyone could hear. Michael watched as her spirit was torn apart in front of him. Everyone stood visibly shaken, not knowing where the scream came from. Michael's lip was curled in an uncontrollable snarl. The priest said a blessing to appease what he believed to be an unsettled spirit, which put everyone except for Michael at ease. After the funeral, everyone walked back to their cars. Michael hugged Lisa's parents, trying to console them the best he could. Just before stepping into the car himself, he gave one last look back towards the grave and saw Azrael standing over it smiling. Michael began to turn back to fight, but Azrael waved and disappeared into the shadows. And that is the end of Chapter 6. Remember, if you like what you heard, hit the subscribe button down below, notification bell to hear whenever I let out a new edition, and hit the like button. Remember to share with your friends, tickle them till they pee, anything to get them to listen. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for listening.